Hi guys, and welcome to Relaxation History Story. Tonight we drop you into a shoreline that smells of salt, wet rope and nervous anticipation, where the sky already feels heavier than it should for this time of year. You stand on frozen ground that crunches faintly underfoot, your breath puffing out in small white clouds, and you realize something unsettling very quickly. Winter is coming faster than anyone promised. You probably will not survive this, at least not comfortably, and definitely not without learning a few harsh lessons the hard way. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, let me know where you are listening from and what time it is there. Now dim the lights, you stay right here as the story moves forward quietly and steadily into the cold. You arrive in Colonial America with expectations that do not match reality. The land looks vast and full of possibility in daylight, but as evening approaches, you sense how exposed everything truly is. There are no finished houses waiting, no neatly stacked firewood piles, no reassuring village walls, just temporary shelters, half-cleared ground, and a growing awareness that the sun is sinking earlier each day. One well-established historical fact is that many early English settlers arrived dangerously close to winter, especially those in Jamestown and Plymouth, misjudging climate and timing after Atlantic crossings that took longer than planned. Standing there now, you feel the weight of that miscalculation settle into your bones. As night approaches, the temperature drops with unsettling speed. The wind slips through every gap in your clothing, tugging at wool that is already damp from travel. You smell wood smoke from a nearby fire, thin and sharp, not yet strong enough to promise warmth. Around you, others move with quiet urgency. Voices stay low, not out of politeness, but from fatigue and unease. The land does not feel hostile exactly, but it feels indifferent, which somehow seems worse. You realize that survival here will depend on noticing small things, how the wind shifts, how clouds thicken, how fast darkness falls. There is a strange mix of hope and denial in the air. People tell themselves that winter back home was cold too, that they endured snow before. But deep down you sense this place is different. The forests are denser. The nights feel longer. Even the silence has a sharper edge. One quirky tidbit from the period is that some settlers believed the American climate would naturally become milder once forests were cleared and land was properly farmed, as if nature itself would politely adapt to European expectations. Standing in the chill now, that belief feels almost charming in its optimism. As dusk deepens, you start to understand how much of survival will happen after sunset. Daylight work matters, yes, but night is when cold seeps in, when fear grows louder, when exhaustion threatens to overwhelm judgment. You watch settlers hurry to finish crude shelters before dark, knowing that even a partial wall can block wind enough to matter. There is no romantic glow here, no cozy hearth imagery yet, just urgency, splintered wood and aching hands. Historians still argue whether the earlier settlers fully understood how brutal North American winters could be, or whether they convinced themselves they would manage simply because failure felt unthinkable. As you stand among them, you sense both possibilities are true at once. Some know the danger and push it aside. Others simply do not know yet what the night will bring. The first evening meal is simple and hurried. Salted meat, hard bread, maybe a thin stew if someone managed to get a pot going. You eat not for comfort, but for energy, because calories are warmth, even if no one uses that word yet. You notice how people linger near the fire, turning slowly like wary animals, warming one side and then the other. Smoke stings your eyes and clings to your clothes, but you welcome it. Smoke means fire, fire means life. As darkness fully settles, the world shrinks. The forest beyond the clearing becomes an indistinct wall, absorbing sound instead of reflecting it. Every crack of a branch makes you tense. The cold presses closer, not dramatically, but persistently, like a hand that never lets go. You pull your cloak tighter, already aware that it will not be enough by morning. There is a mental adjustment happening, too subtle but profound. Back home night meant rest. Here night feels like a test. You realize that sleep will not come easily, and when it does, it may not be safe. People speak quietly about keeping embers alive until dawn, about taking turns watching the fire, about listening for changes in wind. These are not habits yet. They are experiments. You lie down eventually on rough ground, maybe layered with pine boughs or straw if you're lucky. The earth is cold beneath you, drawing heat from your body with patient efficiency. Above the sky is clear and sharp with stars, beautiful in a way that feels almost cruel. You focus on your breathing, on the faint crackle of the fire nearby, on the presence of others, breathing and shifting in the dark. Community already feels essential, not emotional, just practical. As your eyes grow heavy, you understand something important. This winter is not a single event you will endure and then forget. It will shape how you build, how you eat, how you think about night itself. These first cold hours are laying the groundwork for habits that may save your life later. The cold does not announce itself with drama. It simply waits confident that you will eventually make a mistake. And as you drift toward uneasy sleep wrapped in borrowed warmth and thin hope, you sense that tonight is only the beginning. The real lessons of winter are still ahead, waiting quietly in the darkness, ready to be learned one long night at a time. You wake sometime in the night, not because of noise, but because your body has gone stiff with cold. It feels like the ground has reached up and taken hold of you, draining warmth inch by inch. For a moment you lie still, confused, listening. The fire nearby has burned low, its glow reduced to a faint orange pulse like a tired heartbeat. Someone shifts close by, muttering softly in their sleep. The night air presses against your face, sharp and dry, carrying the smell of ash and damp earth. This is what the first real winter nights feel like, and there is no pretending otherwise now. The shelters around you are barely deserving of the name. Rough frames of wood, hastily raised, patched with whatever could be found. Mudbark scraps of sailcloth, even woven reeds in some places. One mainstream historical fact often overlooked is that many early colonial shelters were intended to be temporary summer structures, never designed for sustained cold. You can tell. The wind snakes through every seam, whispering through cracks like it is testing each weakness in turn. When it finds one, it lingers. You pull your knees closer to your chest, trying to conserve heat the way instinct suggests. The straw beneath you rustles softly. Someone coughs. Another person feeds the fire a small piece of wood, careful not to waste it. Firewood is already precious. You realize quickly that warmth is not a constant here. It is something you borrow for short periods and then lose again. As dawn approaches, pale and reluctant, you finally understand how exhausting the night has been. Your muscles ache, not from labor, but from tension. Staying warm requires constant awareness. You notice how the cold seems to sharpen every sensation. The scrape of fabric, the creak of timber, even the slow drip of condensation somewhere inside a shelter sounds loud in the quiet hours before sunrise. Morning brings little relief. The sun rises weakly, offering light more than warmth. You step outside and see frost clinging to everything. Grass tools the edges of barrels, all outlined in white. Breath fogs the air as people emerge, rubbing hands, stamping feet. There is no complaining, at least not openly. Complaints cost energy, and energy equals warmth. Throughout the day, efforts focus on improving shelters. Thicker walls, smaller openings, lower ceilings to trap heat. Someone suggests digging partially into the ground, remembering how root cellars stay cool in summer and warmer in winter. This is not yet proven, just a hopeful idea. A quirky tidbit from the time is that some settlers stuffed their walls with seaweed when near the coast, discovering that dried kelp could block wind surprisingly well, though it smelled strongly when damp. You wrinkle your nose just thinking about it, but warmth is warmth. Night comes again too soon. It always does. This time you are better prepared, but only slightly. More wood has been gathered. Fires are set deeper inside shelters when possible, though this brings its own danger. Smoke hangs heavy in enclosed spaces, stinging eyes and throats. You trade clean air for warmth without much discussion. Choices here are rarely ideal. You settle in for the night with a clearer sense of what to expect. The cold will creep. Sleep will come in fragments. Dreams will be shallow and easily broken. You position yourself near others close enough to share body heat without crowding the fire. The smell of unwashed wool and smoke becomes familiar, oddly comforting. It means people are near. As hours pass, you notice how the shelter itself seems to react to the cold. Wood contracts with soft popping sounds. Mud plaster cracks faintly. Wind rattles loose material, setting up a low, restless rhythm. These sounds make it hard to relax. Each unfamiliar noise could mean the shelter failing a gap opening wide enough to let the cold rush in. Historians still argue whether early settlers underestimated winter more due to ignorance or overconfidence, shaped by recent survival of the ocean crossing. Lying here now, you feel how survival breeds a dangerous optimism. You made it across the Atlantic. Surely you can make it through a night. But winter does not care about your past victories. At some point, snow begins to fall. You do not see it at first. You hear it. A soft hush outside the wind muffled the forest going strangely quiet. Snow changes the soundscape completely. It insulates even as it threatens. By morning, it will pile against shelter walls, both blocking drafts and pressing inward with cold weight. You wake again near dawn this time to an unfamiliar stillness. The fire has gone out. The air inside the shelter feels colder than outside, somehow heavy and stale. You step out and see the world transformed. Snow blankets everything, smoothing rough edges, hiding hazards. It is beautiful in a way that almost tricks you into forgetting how dangerous it is. The reality sets in quickly. Wet snow soaks clothing, melting drips into shelters, the cold deepens. People move with renewed urgency, clearing snow from roofs, reinforcing walls. Someone laughs briefly at the absurdity of it all, then stops as if laughter might invite misfortune. These early nights teach you something vital. Survival is not about enduring a single extreme moment. It is about managing a constant drain. Heat, energy, morale. Everything leaks away slowly unless you actively contain it. The shelters, crude as they are, become symbols of that struggle. Each patch, each layer added, is a small defiance against the cold. As evening falls again, you feel a subtle shift inside yourself. Fear is still there, but it has changed shape. It is less sharp, more steady. You are learning the rhythm of winter nights, the way cold announces itself, the way the body responds, the way community matters most when darkness stretches long and silent. You lie down once more, listening to the wind slide over snow, feeling the shared warmth of those beside you. The shelter creaks, but it holds barely. For now, barely is enough. You begin to notice that winter has a personality, and it speaks most clearly at night. It does not shout, it murmurs. The cold announces itself through subtle signs long before it becomes dangerous. A change in wind direction, the way smoke sinks instead of rising, the sudden clarity of the stars. You lie awake listening, learning this new language because misunderstanding it could cost you dearly. During the day, people talk more about the weather than anything else. Not casually, not as small talk, but as strategy. Someone points out how the wind has shifted north. Another notices a pale ring around the moon, which some believe signals coming snow. One mainstream historical fact is that early settlers relied heavily on weather observation, long before formal forecasting using sky color, animal behavior, and wind patterns to anticipate cold nights. You find yourself paying attention to, even if you cannot yet interpret what you see. As night falls, the air feels different, depending on what kind of cold is coming. Dry cold bites sharply stinging skin and making breath feel thin. Damp cold seeps heavier, soaking through layers and settling deep in joints. You learn to tell them apart. Dry cold means clearer skies, more stars, and faster heat loss. Damp cold often brings clouds and snow, sometimes a strange kind of muffled warmth that does not last. You sit near the fire as evening deepens, watching the flames closely. Fire teaches its own lessons. When the flame burns low and blue, it means the air is cold and oxygen scarce. When sparks leap suddenly, it often means wind has found its way inside. These are not things anyone formally explains to you. You absorb them by watching, by feeling the temperature shift on your face. There is a quiet competition between warmth and time. The fire will not last all night. It never does. Wood burns down, embers fade, and someone must decide whether to feed it or save fuel for later. These decisions happen in murmured conversations and meaningful glances. Firewood gathering during daylight becomes urgent. You learn to judge weight and dryness at a glance because wet wood wastes energy and gives little heat. A quirky tidbit from this period is that some settlers believed certain types of wood carried different qualities of warmth, claiming oak burned steady and kind while pine burned hot but quickly and made people restless in sleep. There is no proof of this, but you hear people discuss it seriously, passing these beliefs along as if warmth itself had moods. Night deepens and the forest speaks in unfamiliar ways. Trees crack sharply as sap freezes inside them. It sounds like distant gunshots, making you flinch until you learn the difference. Ice forms on nearby water, expanding with loud groans and pops. The sounds are unsettling at first, but gradually they become part of the background, a frozen chorus, reminding you that everything is adjusting to the cold, not just you. You notice how animals react too. Birds disappear entirely at night, leaving the world eerily empty. Livestock huddle closer together, their breath steaming, bodies pressed tight. You instinctively move nearer to them when possible, drawn by their warmth and steady presence. Animals understand winter without words. You try to learn from them. Historians still argue whether settlers learned these observational skills primarily from indigenous neighbours or rediscovered them independently out of necessity. Lying awake now, listening to the night, you suspect it was both. Survival encourages humility. Pride melts quickly in the cold. Sleep comes in brief stretches. You drift off, then wake again, checking the fire, adjusting your position, pulling fabric tighter around your shoulders. Your body learns to sleep lightly alert, even in rest. Dreams feel thin and fragmented. When you do dream, it is often of warmth. Sunlit rooms, summer fields. The memory of heat becomes a comfort you cling to. The cold changes how you think about time. Minutes stretch, hours feel longer. You begin measuring the night not by clocks, which you may not even have, but by sensations. How numb your toes feel. How often you need to move fingers to keep them responsive. How many times you wake before dawn. You also learn the importance of sound. Complete silence can be dangerous. It might mean snow has piled too heavily, muffling everything, or that the fire has gone out entirely. A low crackle, even faint, is reassuring. So is the sound of another person breathing nearby. These noises anchor you in the night. In the quiet hours, thoughts wander. Fear creeps in easily. What if the shelter collapses under snow? What if illness comes? What if the fire sparks and everything burns? Winter leaves little room for distraction. You confront these thoughts because there is nowhere to escape them. Over time, they lose some of their sharpness, dulled by the repetition and fatigue. You begin to understand that surviving winter nights is as much mental as physical. Panic wastes heat. Calm conserves it. People who thrash and complain seem colder than those who lie still and accept discomfort. You practice stillness, focusing on slow breathing, imagining warmth pooling in your core. By the time dawn arrives, you feel a strange sense of accomplishment, even if the night was miserable. You made it through. Again. The pale light reveals frost patterns on shelter walls, delicate and beautiful. You touch them briefly, then pull your hand back, skin aching from the cold. As the sun rises, you move stiffly, joints protesting. But you also feel more attuned to this place. The cold no longer feels like an enemy you do not understand. It is still dangerous, still unforgiving, but it has patterns, and patterns can be learned. You realize that every night survived adds to a growing body of knowledge. The way to angle your body against drafts. The best place to sit near the fire. The sounds that mean trouble and those that mean nothing at all. These lessons accumulate quietly night after night. As evening approaches, once more you prepare with more confidence than before. Not comfort. confidence. You know the cold is coming, but you also know how to listen now. And in a winter where listening can mean the difference between life and death, that knowledge feels like its own kind of warmth. As evening settles in again, your attention keeps drifting back to the fire. Not out of comfort, but necessity. Fire is no longer just something you gather around. It is something you negotiate with, something you respect. You sit close enough to feel its warmth on your face, yet far enough to avoid sparks that sting when they land on skin. The flames crackle softly, casting restless shadows that climb the rough walls of the shelter. In this light, everything looks fragile. Written accounts from early colonial settlements make it clear that open hearth fires were the primary and often only reliable source of heat during winter nights. There were no chimneys at first, no proper ventilation. Smoke pooled under low roofs, making eyes water and lungs ache. You cough quietly, trying not to draw attention. Breathing shallowly becomes a skill just like everything else here. Fire dictates the rhythm of the night. Someone must stay awake to tend it, nudging embers, adding wood sparingly. Too much fuel, and the fire roars dangerously. Too little, and it dies, leaving the shelter exposed. You watch how carefully people measure each piece of wood with their eyes before placing it in the flames. There is no casual tossing. Every log represents time, warmth, and effort spent gathering it earlier in the day. The heat feels uneven. One side of your body warms while the other remains cold, forcing you to shift slowly, deliberately. Quick movements waste heat. You notice how everyone has learned this instinctively. The fire becomes a quiet gathering point, not for conversation but for shared vigilance. Faces glow orange expressions, tired and focused. A strange belief circulating among some settlers suggests that keeping a fire burning steadily through the night could ward off illness, not just cold. People whisper that sickness creeps in when embers fade. While there is no medical understanding behind it, you cannot help noticing that warmth does seem to bring comfort, if not health. The idea lingers in your mind as you stretch your hands toward the flames. The danger is always present. Sparks leap unexpectedly. Fabric smoulders if held too close. You smell singed wool and pull back quickly. Fire giveth and fire threateneth. More than one settlement lost shelters to accidental night fires, something later colonial records mention with grim regularity. You understand why everyone treats the flames with both gratitude and fear. As the night deepens, you listen to the fire rather than watch it. The sound tells you how it is doing. A soft crackle means steady burning. A sudden hiss suggests damp wood stealing heat instead of giving it. You learn to recognize these sounds without opening your eyes, even as sleep pulls at you. The fire also becomes a place of quiet ritual. Someone murmurs a prayer before feeding it. Another traces a small symbol in the ash, something learned long ago. These actions are not announced or explained. They happen naturally, small gestures meant to reassure in a world that feels increasingly uncertain after dark. There remains disagreement among researchers about how often settlers kept fires burning all night versus letting them die and relighting them at dawn. Watching this group, you sense the decision shifts with conditions. On the coldest nights, no one risks letting the fire go out. The cold would seep in too fast, too deep. Smoke thickens as air cools outside. It curls low, clinging to the ceiling, making your eyes sting and your throat dry. You blink, often tears forming, but you stay close. Smoke means warmth, and warmth is worth the discomfort. Your clothes absorb the smell, and you know it will cling to you long after winter ends, a scent that will forever remind you of survival. Time stretches. The fire slowly shrinks despite careful feeding. Embers glow red, then dim. You lean in, extending warmth one last time before shifting back, careful not to crowd others. There is a quiet understanding in these movements. Everyone reads the fire the same way now. At some point, someone dozes off too close. A gentle nudge brings them back, no words exchanged. Carelessness at night is dangerous. You sense how quickly trust forms here, built not on friendship but on shared dependence. Everyone relies on everyone else to keep the fire alive, but not too alive. As the fire fades toward dawn, you feel both relief and anxiety. Relief that the night is nearly over, anxiety that the warmth is leaving with it. The sky outside lightens slightly, just enough to outline shapes beyond the shelter. The fire crackles one last time before settling into glowing ash. You sit quietly absorbing what the night has taught you. Fire is not just heat, it is time measured in wood. It is safety balanced against risk. It is something you must tend with patience and respect. These lessons sink in slowly like warmth returning to numb fingers. When daylight finally arrives, pale and cold, you step away from the hearth carrying the smell of smoke with you. You know now that every winter night will revolve around fire, and each one will demand the same careful attention, the same steady respect as you continue learning how to survive when darkness and cold work together. As night approaches once more, you focus less on walls and fire and more on what touches your skin. Clothing becomes your first line of defense long before the shelter or the hearth. You tug at layers that feel heavier, now stiffened by kaboke and sweat and cold. Nothing fits quite right. Sleeves pull short when you move. Seams rub raw against wrists and neck. Comfort is not part of the design. Surviving letters and inventories from colonial settlements show that most early settlers relied on wool and linen for winter clothing, materials familiar from Europe but poorly suited to the harsher cold here. Wool traps heat, yes, but when it gets wet it becomes heavy and slow to dry. Linen offers breathability but little insulation. You feel this imbalance every time damp fabric clings to your skin, stealing warmth instead of keeping it. You learn to layer instinctively. Shirt, waistcoat, coat, cloak, whatever scraps can be added on top. At night you do not remove clothing unless absolutely necessary. Even sleeping fully dressed becomes normal. Shoes stay close sometimes, even on because frozen leather in the morning is harder to manage than the discomfort of wearing them overnight. Hands and feet demand constant attention. Fingers stiffen, first growing clumsy and slow. Toes follow, numbing quietly until you realize you cannot feel them at all. You rub them gently, careful not to be too rough. People have learned that sudden heat on frozen skin brings pain and damage. Warming must be gradual, patient. An odd habit mentioned in a few personal journals involves settlers stuffing extra cloth-dried grass or even scraps of paper into shoes at night to insulate their feet. It is not elegant, but it works. You consider it yourself folding fabric where you can, grateful for anything that blocks the cold creeping up from the ground. The smell of clothing becomes unavoidable. Smoke, sweat, damp, wool, all layered together. Washing in winter is rare and dangerous. Wet clothes mean heat loss, and heat loss can mean death. So garments are aired when possible, held near the fire just long enough to drive out moisture, but never long enough to risk sparks. You notice how people modify their clothing over time. Sleeves are sewn shut at the wrists. Gaps at the neck are tied closed with string or ribbon. Some cut holes in blankets and wear them like ponchos at night. These adjustments happen quietly without ceremony. Practical changes matter more than appearance now. Researchers continue to question how much clothing styles evolved during the earliest winters versus how much settlers simply endured discomfort until better supplies arrived. Watching the small adaptations happening around you, it feels clear that necessity pushes creativity quickly when cold nights demand it. Sleep is restless. Layers restrict movement. Turning over becomes a careful operation to avoid letting cold air rush inside. You wake often adjusting fabric, pulling edges tighter. Someone nearby mutters in their sleep, tugging their cloak back into place. Everyone shares the same half-conscious vigilance. You learn to recognize the warning signs of cold stress. Shivering that will not stop. Fingers that refuse to move. A strange calm that replaces discomfort, tempting you to stay still. When you notice it in yourself, you force movement, rubbing arms, shifting position. When you notice it in others, you nudge them awake gently. Night stretches long, but clothing buys you time. Not comfort, but time. Time for the fire to last longer. Time for dawn to approach. Time for your body to keep functioning despite the cold. By morning, garments are stiff with frost at the edges. You peel them away, slowly flexing limbs until sensation returns. The ache is deep and dull, but you welcome it. Pain means you are still alive, still warm enough to feel. As the sun rises weakly, you hang clothing where you can, letting pale light and thin warmth do what they can. You understand now that winter survival is built layer by layer. Shelter, fire, clothing. None perfect alone, but together just enough. When evening comes again, you dress with intention. Each layer is placed carefully. Gaps, sealed fabric adjusted. You are no longer just wearing clothes. You are wearing protection, memory, and hard-earned understanding. And as darkness settles in once more, you feel slightly better prepared to face another long night wrapped in wool smoke and determination. As the light fades, your thoughts turn not to comfort but to fuel. Food is warmth. Everyone knows that now, even if no one phrases it that way. You feel it in your body when you eat. A heaviness settles in your stomach, followed by a subtle glow that pushes back against the cold for a while. Nights without enough food are always colder. The connection is impossible to ignore. Accounts from the early colonies show that winter diets relied heavily on preserved foods. Salted meat, dried fish, hard bread, and whatever grains survived the harvest made up most evening meals. Fresh food is rare now. Vegetables are long gone. Fruit exists only in memory. You chew slowly, jaw-aching bread tough enough to demand patience. Eating is work, but you do it carefully, knowing every bite matters. The smell of food fills the shelter, briefly mixing with the smoke and damp wool. It's not an inviting aroma, but it signals survival. Someone stirs a thin stew over the fire, stretching ingredients with water and hope. The liquid warms your hands when the bowl is passed to you. You cradle it, letting heat seep into your palms before drinking. A lesser-known detail recorded in some settlements is that colonists sometimes save their fattiest foods for night-time, believing heavier meals help the body endure cold while sleeping. Fat becomes valuable in winter, not just for cooking but for endurance. You notice how even small portions of meat seem to make the night more bearable. Meals are quiet affairs. Conversation wastes energy and mouths are busy chewing. The fire crackles softly as the pot simmers. Steam rises and condenses on cold surfaces, dripping back down. You eat slowly, stretching the moment, aware that once the bowl is empty, the warmth will fade. There is a balance to be struck. Eat too much and you grow sluggish, risking sleep so deep you fail to notice danger. Eat too little and the cold gnaws harder. Over time, people learn what works for their own bodies. You pay attention to how your stomach feels, how long the warmth lasts, how quickly hunger returns. Debate continues among scholars about how well early settlers understood nutrition in relation to cold endurance. They lacked modern knowledge, yet practical experience taught them quickly. You sense that winter itself was the teacher, unforgiving but effective. After eating, you wipe your hands on your clothing, leaving faint grease marks that will never fully wash out. Grease is not waste here. It seeps into fabric, adding a thin barrier against wind and moisture. Nothing is truly discarded in winter. Everything has potential use. The fire is fed again carefully as people settle in for the night. Full stomachs bring a brief sense of calm. Muscles relax slightly, shivering eases. You stretch out, arranging yourself near others, careful not to press too close to the flames. The warmth from food combines with shared body heat, creating a fragile bubble against the cold. Sleep comes easier after eating, but it's still light. You drift off and wake again, stomach emptying, heat fading. Hunger creeps back quietly, not enough to wake you fully, but enough to remind you that dawn is still far away. When morning finally arrives, hunger greets you before the cold does. Your body demands fuel again urgently. You understand now why winter stores are guarded so carefully. Food is not just survival for the day. It is survival for the night that follows. As you rise stiffly and look toward the fire pit now cold and grey, you know tonight will require another careful balance. Enough food to stay warm, enough restraint to last the season. Each meal is a calculation, each bite a small act of defiance against the cold that waits patiently for mistakes. You move through the day with that knowledge close to you, already thinking ahead to the next night when bowls will pass hand to hand, steam will rise briefly and warmth will once again come from within, just long enough to see you through the dark. You learn quickly that sleep itself can be dangerous, not because of dreams or darkness, but because stillness invites the cold to settle in. As night deepens, you lie down carefully, arranging your body like someone preparing for a long journey rather than rest. You tuck your knees in slightly conserving heat arms, crossed over your chest. Breathing slows. Every movement is deliberate. Personal accounts from early colonial winters describe how people rarely slept uninterrupted through the night. Instead, rest came in short stretches broken by waking to tend the fire, adjust clothing, or simply move enough to keep blood flowing. You experience this rhythm now drifting off only to wake again, muscles stiff, skin chilled, mind alert. The ground beneath you radiates cold relentlessly. Even layers of straw and cloth only soften it. You shift position slowly, careful not to let drafts rush in. Sleeping flat feels risky. Curling slightly feels safer. Over time, you develop preferences based on what keeps warmth longest, not what feels comfortable. There is a quiet awareness that sleep too deep can be fatal. You hear whispered warnings about people who never woke after particularly cold nights. Whether these stories are exaggerated or not hardly matters. They keep you alert. You notice how people check on one another subtly, listening for breathing, nudging shoulders gently when someone lies too still. An unusual practice mentioned in some diaries involves settlers sleeping in shifts with one person staying partially awake while others rest, then rotating. It is not formal, not announced, but it happens naturally. Someone always seems to be awake, staring into embers, listening to the night. That presence is reassuring. Questions remain among researchers about how much of this fragmented sleep pattern was intentional strategy versus simple necessity forced by cold and discomfort. From where you lie half awake, half dreaming, the distinction feels meaningless. The result is the same. Sleep becomes light, cautious, shared with vigilance. Dreams come strangely, short, vivid, and often interrupted. You dream of warmth, of heavy blankets, of rooms without drafts. When you wake, the contrast is sharp. Cold air brushes your face, reminding you where you are. You pull fabric tighter, exhale slowly and try again. The body adapts in small ways. You learn to recognize the edge between healthy shivering and dangerous numbness. You move before stiffness becomes immobility. These decisions happen without full consciousness, now guided by experience and instinct. You listen to the sounds around you as you rest. The faint breathing of others, the soft crack of cooling embers, the distant groan of trees outside. These sounds anchor you, keeping you oriented. Silence would feel wrong, unsettling. Night stretches on. Time loses clarity. You doze, wake again. Each brief rest feels earned. Each awakening feels necessary. You no longer expect deep sleep. You aim for survival. When dawn finally approaches, it arrives subtly. The air changes first, less biting, more still. Light seeps in, slowly, pale and thin. You realize you have made it through another night, not by sleeping well, but by sleeping wisely. As you rise stiffly, joints protesting, you understand something important. Sleep here is not escape, it is another task, another skill to be learned, and like every other winter lesson, it demands awareness, patience, and respect for the cold that never fully rests. By now you understand that warmth is rarely a solitary achievement. As night settles, bodies draw closer together, almost without discussion. The space inside the shelter feels smaller after dark, not because the walls move, but because everyone shifts inward, instinctively seeking shared heat. You settle beside others, close enough to feel their presence, close enough that the cold has less room to slip in. Accounts from early settlements describe winter nights spent with entire families and sometimes neighbours, sleeping in the same room, often in the same bed or on the same packed floor. Privacy was a luxury abandoned as soon as temperatures dropped. You feel this change in priorities clearly. Modesty matters less than survival. Warmth matters more than comfort. The combined heat of several bodies changes the air itself. It feels heavier, slightly damp, carrying the scent of breath and wool. Condensation gathers where warm air meets cold walls dripping softly. The sound is faint but constant, like a slow-ticking clock marking the night. People arrange themselves carefully. Children are placed in the centre, shielded by adults on either side. The sick are kept close to the fire. Those strongest against the cold take positions nearer the edges. No one announces these choices. They happen naturally, guided by observation and care. One lesser-known habit from some communities involved hanging blankets or spare cloth between sleepers, not for separation but to trap pockets of warm air. You notice how these makeshift barriers soften drafts, creating small zones where heat lingers just a bit longer. The closeness brings mixed feelings. There is reassurance in hearing steady breathing nearby and knowing you are not alone in the dark. At the same time, there is restlessness. Bodies shift. Someone coughs. Another mutters in sleep. Space is tight and every movement is felt by others. Discussion continues among historians about whether communal sleeping arrangements were primarily cultural carryovers or practical responses to winter conditions. Lying here now, pressed shoulder to shoulder, the answer seems obvious. Cold makes decisions quickly. Tradition follows necessity. As the night deepens, shared warmth becomes more valuable. When someone rises to tend the fire, the sudden absence of their body heat is noticeable. A cool gap opens, quickly filled as others shift closer. The shelter breathes with these movements, expanding and contracting subtly. You become aware of how much emotional comfort comes from physical closeness. Fear softens when you're not alone. The sounds of the night feel less threatening when filtered through the presence of others. Even silence feels safer when it is shared. Sleep comes in waves. You drift, wake, adjust, then drift again. Each time you wake, you check the people around you without thinking. Are they still breathing? Are they warm enough? This quiet monitoring becomes part of the night's rhythm. By morning, limbs are stiff, circulation sluggish. You separate slowly, careful not to disturb those still resting. The air feels colder once bodies move apart, the shelter losing its shared heat. You miss it immediately. As daylight returns, you carry the memory of that closeness with you. You understand now that winter nights are survived together. Fire helps, clothing helps, food helps, but it is shared warmth, human warmth, that makes the longest nights bearable. When evening approaches again, you already know where you will settle. Near others, close enough to feel life moving beside you. In this cold world, community is not just companionship, it is insulation. As winter deepens, you begin to notice how often survival depends on knowledge that did not originate with the settlers themselves. Certain techniques work better than others, and the most effective ones often come quietly passed along without much credit. You listen, you watch, and you adopt what keeps you warm regardless of where it came from. Early colonial records and later recollections reveal that indigenous communities had long adapted to these winters using materials and methods finely tuned to the land. Settlers who observed closely learned to insulate shelters with earth bark and layered organic matter, rather than relying only on thin wooden walls. You feel the difference immediately when these methods are used. Drafts lessen, temperatures hold steadier through the night. One practice you see adopted involves lining sleeping areas with evergreen boughs. Pine and spruce needles create a springy layer that lifts bodies slightly off frozen ground and releases a sharp, clean scent. The smell cuts through smoke and dampness, making the shelter feel more breathable. It also discourages insects, though that matters little now in winter. Some settlers hesitate at first, uncomfortable borrowing unfamiliar techniques. Others embrace them quickly. Cold has a way of lowering pride. You notice how results matter more than origin stories once the temperature drops. Warmth convinces more effectively than words. There are quieter lessons too. How to position shelters against prevailing winds. How to use snow itself as insulation once it piles high enough. You learn that snow packed carefully can block wind better than wood alone. It feels counterintuitive at first, but the nights prove it works. One curious belief you hear shared suggests that certain natural materials carry protective qualities, not just physical warmth. Some settlers adopt these ideas cautiously, others wholeheartedly. Whether symbolic or practical, these additions make shelters feel more secure, and that sense of security matters at night. Researchers have long differed on how openly settlers acknowledge their reliance on indigenous knowledge. Official records often downplay it, while personal journals hint at quiet dependence. From your perspective inside the shelter, the truth feels plain. Survival here is collaborative, whether publicly admitted or not. As darkness settles, you prepare your sleeping space using what you have learned. Extra earth packed against walls, boughs arranged carefully beneath you, smaller openings sealed tight. The difference is noticeable. The cold still comes, but it moves more slowly now. The night sounds change as well. Wind outside feels distant, muffled by added insulation. Snow piles softly against walls instead of forcing its way through cracks. You breathe easier, body relaxing slightly for the first time in days. You drift in and out of sleep, comforted by the steady temperature. It is not warm, but it is manageable. You realize that knowledge can be as valuable as supplies. Learning how to work with the environment rather than against it makes the cold less punishing. By morning, frost still clings to the shelter's edges, but inside feels less severe. People move with a bit more energy. Conversation is lighter. Small successes matter in winter, and this feels like one. As you step outside into the pale light, you glance back at the shelter with new respect. It is no longer just a European structure transplanted onto unfamiliar land. It is becoming something else, shaped by borrowed wisdom and hard experience. When evening comes again, you carry that knowledge with you. The night still demands caution, but now it also offers proof that adaptation works. And as you settle in once more, surrounded by the quiet lessons of those who survived these winters long before you, the darkness feels just a little less unforgiving. As night closes in, the world becomes quieter in a way that feels intentional. Daytime noises fade, replaced by sounds that seem designed to travel farther in the cold. You notice how even the smallest creak carries through the frozen air. A footstep outside the shelter sounds louder than it should. A cough feels like it echoes. Winter nights amplify everything. You lie still listening. The shelter has its own voice now. Wood contracts with a slow, deliberate groan. Joints shift as temperatures fall. It can sound unsettling at first, like something moving just beyond sight, but you learn to recognize the patterns. These sounds mean the structure is adjusting, not failing. Beyond the walls, the forest speaks differently. Trees crack sharply as moisture inside them freezes, a sound so sudden it makes your heart jump. At first, people mistake it for gunfire or splitting timbers. Over time, you learn the difference. The forest is not breaking apart. It is tightening. Ice forms on nearby streams and ponds, announcing itself with low moans and popping snaps. The sound travels through the ground. Faint vibrations you feel more than hear. It reminds you that water, like people, struggles against being held still by cold. Written descriptions from early winters mention how silence itself became a warning sign. When snow fell thickly, it swallowed sound, leaving an eerie stillness. You sense that now. The wind seems distant. Footsteps vanish quickly. The world feels padded, hushed, and watchful. A curious belief circulates among the settlers that certain night sounds predict weather shifts. A loud cracking in the trees might mean colder air moving in. A restless wind at dusk could signal snowfall before dawn. You do not know if these ideas are reliable, but you listen closely anyway. In winter, any hint feels worth noting. Some researchers suggest that heightened nighttime awareness altered how settlers slept and thought, while others argue people simply adapted out of necessity without much reflection. Lying awake now, senses tune sharply to every noise you feel. The truth may sit somewhere between. Awareness becomes habit before it becomes thought. You notice how people react differently to sounds depending on experience. New arrivals startle easily, shifting at every creak. Those who have endured several weeks of winter remain still conserving energy. They know which noises matter and which can be ignored. That knowledge feels like another layer of insulation. Animals add to the nighttime chorus. Livestock shuffle and snort softly, their breath visible even in darkness. A distant howl carries across the frozen land, brief but unmistakable. You tense then relax when it fades. Predators exist, but cold often drives them to conserve energy too. Inside the shelter, human sounds dominate. Breathing, the soft rustle of fabric, someone adjusting position. These noises reassure you. They confirm that others are awake, alert, surviving alongside you. Sleep comes lightly interrupted by the sound, more often than by cold. Each noise pulls you back just enough to check your surroundings. Fire, people, walls. Once everything feels accounted for, you let yourself drift again. As dawn approaches, sounds shift subtly. The forest grows quieter as night creatures retreat. Ice settles. The world holds its breath. You recognize this change now, knowing morning is near, even before light appears. When daylight finally filters in, sounds return gradually. Snow crunches underfoot. Voices rise slightly, tools clink, the night soundscape dissolves, replaced by familiar daytime noise. You step outside and breathe deeply, listening to the world reawaken. You realize that winter nights taught you to hear differently. Sound became information. Silence became warning. And as evening will come again soon enough, you carry that listening forward, ready to lie still once more and let the frozen world speak. As the nights stretch longer, you begin to feel the weight of them, not just in your body, but in your thoughts. Darkness settles earlier now, lingering well into the morning. Candlelight and firelight become your primary companion, small islands of glow surrounded by shadow. The mind with fewer distractions turns inward whether you want it to or not. Letters and journals from colonial winters often describe a creeping heaviness that arrived with prolonged cold and limited daylight. People wrote of restless thoughts, lingering worries, and a sense of time slowing to a crawl. You feel that shift happening in yourself. Hours feel thicker. Waiting becomes harder. The night seems endless, even when you know dawn will come. Fear moves differently in winter. It is quieter, more persistent. During the day, work pushes it aside. At night, it returns, settling into the spaces left by silence. You think about supplies running low, about illness spreading, about mistakes that could turn deadly before help arrives. These thoughts arrive uninvited, looping gently but insistently. To cope, people turn to routine. The same actions each night, the same place to sit, the same order of preparing for sleep. Familiarity becomes soothing. Even small rituals help. A prayer murmured softly, a story repeated for the 100th time. These acts anchor the mind when the dark threatens to pull it loose. There is also boredom, an emotion rarely acknowledged but deeply felt. Winter limits movement. Travel is risky. Tasks shrink to what can be done indoors or nearby. Minds wander. You find yourself replaying memories of warmer times, of colour and movement and noise. The contrast makes the present feel sharper. Some settlers believed that keeping the mind occupied was as important as keeping the body warm. They carved small objects, repaired tools, recited passages they remembered by heart. One unusual habit involved counting knots in rope or tallying days with marks on wood. Simple tasks meant to give shape to time. Modern scholars have not fully agreed on how much psychological strain winter placed on early settlers compared to physical hardship. Sitting awake in the dim glow of embers, you suspect the two are inseparable. A tired mind makes poor decisions. A fearful mind burns energy faster. Sleep offers partial escape, but even dreams feel different now. They are vivid, sometimes unsettling. You wake with fragments clinging to you, unsure where dream ends and waking begins. Cold blurs those boundaries. You notice how people respond differently. Some grow quieter, withdrawn. Others talk more, filling silence with words. Laughter appears unexpectedly sharp and brief, then fades. Emotions seem closer to the surface, less guarded. As the night deepens, you practice calming your thoughts. Slow breathing, focusing on the fire's glow, listening to familiar sounds. These techniques are not named or taught formally, but they work. The body relaxes, the mind follows. By morning, the heaviness lifts slightly, replaced by the practical demands of the day. But you know it will return with nightfall. Understanding this helps. Anticipation softens its edge. As evening approaches again, you prepare not just shelter and fire, but yourself. You remind yourself that the dark has passed before and will pass again. That thought becomes a quiet companion as you settle in, letting the night wrap around you once more. As night gathers again, you become more aware of the smallest figures among you. Children experience winter nights differently. Their bodies are lighter, their warmth quicker to fade, their sleep deeper and harder to interrupt. You watch how adults move around them with extra care once darkness settles, adjusting blankets, checking breathing, listening more closely than they do for themselves. Household records and family letters from colonial settlements show that children were often kept closest to the fire or placed between adults during winter nights. This was not sentiment, it was practical. Smaller bodies lose heat faster. You see this logic play out without discussion. A child is gently shifted inward. An adult takes the colder edge. The sounds children make at night are sharper in the quiet, a whimper, a restless sigh, a cough that draws immediate attention. You notice how quickly adults respond, rising, despite stiffness and fatigue. No one ignores these sounds. In winter, a child's discomfort can turn serious quickly. Some families rely on shared warmth more heavily when children are present. Sleeping arrangements tighten. Space is surrendered. Elbows press closer. Discomfort becomes irrelevant. You feel the subtle shift in the shelter's mood when children sleep. Vigilance increases. Movements grow quieter. There is also resilience here. Children adapt quickly in ways that surprise you. They learn where to sit, how to hold their hands near the fire, how to curl into warmth without instruction. They complain less than you expect, accepting discomfort as normal because it is all they know. A small but striking detail appears in several period recollections. Some parents believe that singing softly at night helped children retain warmth by keeping them calmer and breathing evenly. You hear a low hum nearby, barely audible, woven into the crackle of embers. Whether or not it truly helps, it soothes everyone listening. The question of how winter shaped childhood in the colonies remains incomplete. Some researchers emphasize hardship and loss. Others note how early responsibility and adaptation became normal. Watching a child sleep through the cold face relaxed. Despite the conditions, you sense both realities existing together. Night stretches on, children shift, seek warmth, instinctively pressing closer. Adults adjust without waking fully. The shelter feels alive with small movements, each one a response to cold. You find yourself listening differently now, attuned to lighter breathing, smaller sounds. Protection becomes shared, instinctive. Survival feels generational in these moments passed quietly through proximity and care rather than instruction. When dawn finally comes, children wake faster than adults, energy returning with light. Their laughter feels almost shocking in the cold air. It reminds you that winter has not taken everything. Joy still finds space even here. As you prepare for another day, you carry the memory of the night with you. Winter nights teach caution. Children teach hope. And as darkness will fall again soon enough, you know those lessons will repeat softly and persistently until the cold finally loosens its hold. Night settles in with the familiar chill, but now it is not just people you rely on for warmth. Animals play their part too. As darkness deepens, livestock are brought closer, sometimes into attached shelters or even directly beside human sleeping spaces. The smell is strong, earthy and warm, cutting through smoke and damp wool. It is not pleasant, but it is comforting. Diaries from colonial farms describe cattle, goats and sheep kept near living quarters during winter, their body heat valued almost as much as their labour. You feel the difference immediately. The air near them stays a fraction warmer. Frost forms more slowly. Breath clouds less thickly. These small changes matter over long nights. Animals settle differently than people. They shift to less conserving energy. Their steady presence creates a sense of calm. You listen to the slow rhythm of breathing, the occasional shuffle of hooves. It is grounding, almost hypnotic. You find it easier to relax with that sound nearby. There is also practicality. Animals need protection from cold too. Exposed livestock can perish overnight, undoing months of work. Keeping them close makes sense. Survival here is layered. What helps one often helps another. Some settlers hold beliefs about animals sensing weather changes before humans do. A restless cow or a horse that refuses to settle is taken as a warning. You watch for these signs now, noting behavior as night approaches. Whether or not it predicts anything, it keeps people alert. Not everyone agrees on how widespread this practice was. Some accounts suggest animals were kept separate when possible. Others imply shared spaces were common during severe cold. Inside the shelter now, with warmth spreading slowly from animal bodies, the reasoning feels undeniable. The sounds of animals blend with the night. Soft snorts, the creak of leather tack, a low rumble of movement. These noises replace some of the forest's more unsettling voices. Predators keep their distance when larger animals are near. You notice how children gravitate toward the animals during the evening, hands resting on warm flanks, fingers buried in thick fur. Adults allow it, watching carefully. Animals offer comfort as well as heat. Sleep comes more steadily tonight. The combined warmth of people and animals creates a pocket of relative safety. You wake less often. When you do, the steady presence beside you reassures. Cold still exists, but it feels held at bay. By morning, frost still coats the ground outside, but inside feels less severe. Animals stir first, eager for light and food. Their movement signals the day's arrival before the sun appears. As you step out into the cold air, you glance back at the shelter, aware of how much you depend on these creatures. They are more than resources. They are partners in enduring the winter. When evening returns, you already anticipate their presence. Another night will pass with shared warmth, steady breathing, and the quiet understanding that survival here is not a solitary effort. In the cold, every living body matters. The longer winter holds on, the more you realize how much survival depends on small inventions made on the spot. Nothing arrives perfectly suited for this place. Tools break, supplies run out. When night falls, you rely on whatever has been repaired, reshaped, or repurposed during the day. Improvisation becomes a quiet form of confidence. As evening approaches, you notice hands busy with small tasks near the fire. A cracked handle is wrapped tightly with cloth and cord. A pot lid is weighted with a stone to keep heat from escaping. These are not permanent fixes, but they work well enough. Many early settlers depended on such temporary solutions, adapting European tools to unfamiliar conditions with limited materials. You sit close and watch, learning without being taught. A blade dulled by frozen wood is sharpened. Carefully, sparks flashing briefly in the low light. Someone melts a resin near the fire, using it to seal a gap in a wooden joint. The smell is sharp and sticky, filling the shelter for a moment. It is unpleasant, but it blocks wind better than nothing. One small habit surprises you. People keep tools close at night within arm's reach. An axe leans against the wall. A knife rests beside bedding. It is not fear driving this, but practicality. If something shifts in the dark, a wall cracks, or a fire spreads, speed matters. Tools are reassurance. There are creative solutions everywhere once you start noticing them. Stones warmed near the fire are wrapped in cloth and tucked near feet. Broken barrels become extra walls. Spare boards are angled to redirect wind away from sleeping areas. Each fix is imperfect, but together they make the night more manageable. Some accounts hint that settlers learned many of these tricks through trial and error, rather than planning. A few nights of bitter cold can teach faster than any instruction. You feel that truth now. Each discomfort leaves behind an idea for next time. Not everyone agrees on how effective these improvisations truly were. Some descriptions paint them as life-saving. Others suggest they offered more reassurance than real protection. Lying here warmed slightly by a stone near your feet, you decide both can be true. Comfort itself has value. The night passes with fewer interruptions. You wake briefly to adjust a blanket or nudge a warm stone closer. These small actions feel empowering. You are not helpless against the cold. You can respond. By dawn, the shelter shows signs of the night's efforts. Cloth wraps darkened by soot, resin hardened in seams, tools resting where they were last used. The space looks lived in, shaped by a necessity. As you rise and stretch stiff muscles, you realize how these nightly adjustments add up. Each fix becomes part of the shelter. Each idea carries forward. Winter does not break you all at once. It challenges you in pieces, and you answer with pieces of your own making. When evening comes again, you prepare with purpose. Tools are placed, stones are warmed, gaps are checked. You know there will be new problems, but you also know you will meet them quietly with whatever you have at hand through another long winter night. Night brings a different kind of fear now, one that has little to do with wind or fire. Illness moves quietly through the settlement, often announcing itself after dark. You notice it in the cough that lingers too long, the feverish restlessness that keeps someone shifting all night, the shallow breathing that sounds wrong even before anyone names it. Winter weakens bodies. Cold drains energy. Limited food dulls resistance. Period accounts describe sickness spreading more easily in winter, especially respiratory ailments that thrived in smoke-filled, crowded shelters. You feel the tension rise whenever someone fails to wake easily or complains of chills that go beyond the cold itself. At night, symptoms seem worse. Fever brings sweating, which quickly turns dangerous when damp clothing meets freezing air. You watch people dry fabric near the fire, turning it carefully to avoid sparks, knowing that wet clothes can undo even the warmest shelter. The smell of sickness mixes with smoke and wool, creating a heaviness that lingers. Care during illness becomes a communal effort. Someone stays awake to monitor breathing. Water is warmed slowly. Food, if available, is saved for the sick. These acts happen quietly without praise. Survival depends on them. There are beliefs about sickness that circulate in the dark. Some think cold air itself carries illness. Others believe foul smells cause disease-prompting efforts to keep shelters as clean as possible despite limited resources. You see people burning herbs or pine needles hoping the smoke might drive sickness away. Whether it works hardly matters. The ritual brings comfort. Records from the time show that winter mortality was higher than in warmer months, especially among the very young and very old. You sense this reality in the careful way people watch one another now. No one sleeps deeply when illness is near. The exact causes of many winter deaths remain unclear even today. Poor nutrition, infection exposure, and exhaustion intertwine, making simple explanations impossible. Sitting awake beside someone whose breathing sounds uneven, you understand how quickly strength can fade when cold and sickness combine. You learn to recognize warning signs. Skin too pale, shivering that will not stop, silence where there should be breath. When you notice them, you act nudging others awake, adding fuel to the fire, sharing warmth. Panic is useless. Response matters. The night stretches on slowly when illness is present. Time feels thick, each hour dragging. You listen closely, counting breaths without realizing it. When dawn finally comes and the sick person still lives, relief washes through the shelter quietly. By morning, exhaustion settles in. Caretaking steals sleep, but no one complains. Another night survived feels like victory enough. As evening approaches again, you prepare with extra caution. Firewood is stacked closer, water is kept warm, bedding is arranged to allow monitoring. You hope the night will pass peacefully, but hope is careful now. When darkness settles, you take your place, once more aware that winter nights test more than endurance. They test compassion, patience, and the fragile balance between life and loss. And as you listen to steady breathing nearby, you hold on to it, letting that rhythm carry you gently through another long night. Night settles with a quieter mood, now one shaped by habit and belief. As the fire burns low, voices soften and the shelter takes on a different rhythm. This is the hour when thoughts turn upward or inward, when words spoken aloud feel heavier than they do in daylight. You notice how people instinctively draw closer to the hearth, not just for warmth, but for reassurance. Faith finds its place beside the fire, not always in grand gestures, but in murmured phrases and familiar cadences. Someone recites a passage remembered from childhood. Another traces a small symbol in ash before settling down. These actions are not announced. They simply happen woven into the routine of night. Written sermons and personal reflections from colonial winters suggest that religious practice often intensified during long cold seasons. Darkness and danger sharpen belief. You feel that here. The night invites reflection. The firelight makes faces look older, more thoughtful. Silence stretches long enough for meaning to settle. Prayer becomes practical. Words ask for warmth, for protection, for morning light. They are spoken softly, not out of fear alone, but out of habit formed over many nights. Even those who rarely speak during the day seem to participate now, drawn by the shared quiet. Some hold private rituals that never make it into official records. A whispered promise, a small object kept close, a repeated phrase said only at night. These habits comfort even when outcomes remain uncertain. You sense how belief fills the gaps left by limited control. There are differences too. Not everyone shares the same faith or practices it the same way. Some sit silently, eyes closed, breathing slow. Others listen without speaking. No one presses the issue. Winter demands cooperation, not argument. The fire flickers, shadows shifting across the walls. You feel time slow the night, stretching gently rather than pressing. Faith does not make the cold disappear, but it softens its edge. It gives shape to waiting. Sleep comes easier when words have been spoken, when worries have been named and set aside. You settle down, listening to the low murmur fade into breathing. The shelter feels steadier, held together not just by wood and mud, but by shared hope. When dawn finally arrives, pale and quiet, you rise with a sense of continuity. Night has passed, morning has returned. The rituals worked, at least in the way that matters most. They carried you through. As evening will come again, you know these moments will repeat. Fire, quiet words, shared silence, and in that repetition, winter nights become something you can endure, one breath, one prayer, one flicker of flame at a time. When night arrives now, you notice how work does not simply stop with the setting sun. It changes shape. Tasks once shared divide along familiar lines shaped by strength, habit, and expectation. As darkness settles, everyone seems to know where they are needed without being told. Inside the shelter, hands move steadily. Clothing is mended by firelight, small tears stitched before they grow larger. Food is portioned carefully for the night ahead and the day to come. Bedding is arranged, shaken free of frost, then layered again. These tasks often fall to women whose evenings stretch long with quiet labour even after bodies ache from the day. Outside, men check walls and roofs, feeling for weakness, listening for shifting boards. Firewood is stacked closer to the entrance so it can be reached without venturing far into the cold. These roles feel fixed, but necessity often bends them. When someone is ill or absent, others step in without comment. Household accounts from colonial life show that winter intensified these divisions of labour, especially after dark when safety mattered most. You sense how routine creates efficiency. Everyone knows their part, and that knowledge keeps the night moving smoothly. There are moments of overlap too. Men come inside to warm hands and help stir a pot. Women step outside briefly to check animals or knock snow from a roof. Winter cares little for tradition when survival is at stake. Some customs linger quietly. A belief persists that certain tasks should not be done at night, like heavy cutting or repairing tools for fear of accidents. You notice how people postpone these chores until daylight, even when cold presses in. Caution shapes behaviour as much as habit. The question of how rigid these roles truly were remains open. Some stories suggest strict expectations. Others hint at flexibility born of hardship. Watching people move seamlessly between tasks as needed, you feel how practicality overrides ideology when nights are long and unforgiving. As the fire burns low, work slows. Final checks are made. Hands rest briefly. Fatigue settles in. The shelter grows quieter, filled with the soft sounds of completion. Tasks done mean a safer night. You settle into place aware of how much unseen effort goes into making rest possible. Someone repaired a tear. Someone moved wood closer. Someone checked the roof one last time. These actions form an invisible net holding the night at bay. Sleep arrives gradually. Even in rest rolls linger. Someone wakes to tend the fire. Someone listens for sounds outside. Responsibility does not vanish with consciousness. It lightens, but it remains. By morning, work resumes without ceremony. The night has passed and the cycle continues. As evening approaches again, you know the pattern will repeat. Different hands, familiar motions, all shaped by the quiet understanding that winter nights are survived through shared effort, layered labour and trust in one another's roles. As night returns, you catch yourself picturing a scene you once believed in. A neat wooden house, a blazing hearth, a family gathered comfortably, faces warm and calm. The image fades quickly when the cold settles in. Reality feels rougher, darker and far less tidy. The idea of the cosy colonial home does not survive long here. The shelters you inhabit are functional, not comforting. Walls are uneven, floors slope, smoke stains everything it touches. Heat gathers in pockets, leaving other corners bitterly cold. You move constantly, seeking the least uncomfortable place rather than true warmth. Comfort, you learn, is a modern luxury. Paintings and later stories often soften these details. But first-hand descriptions tell a different story. Winter nights were marked by discomfort that never fully eased. You feel it now in stiff fingers, aching joints, and the constant awareness of cold pressing in from all sides. You notice how the fire rarely dominates the space the way stories suggest. It offers light and some heat, but it cannot reach every corner. Those farthest from it sleep cold, awaking more often. The idea of evenly warmed rooms belongs to a future that has not arrived yet. There are small attempts at coziness, a shared story, a song hummed softly, a blanket pulled higher. These moments matter, but they do not erase the cold, they simply soften it briefly. Some settlers arrive expecting comfort to grow naturally as homes are built. Others accept early on that winter will always demand compromise. That difference in expectation shapes how people cope. Those who cling to idealized images seem more disappointed, more worn down by nightfall. The truth of these homes sits somewhere between survival and endurance. They keep the wind out most of the time. They hold just enough heat to prevent disaster. They are not havens. They are shields, thin ones. You lie back, listening to the fire crackle faintly, feeling the chill along your back. You understand now that warmth is earned in pieces, not granted by walls alone. The myth of the cozy home dissolves, replaced by something more honest and more fragile. When dawn comes, it brings no sudden comfort, only light and the chance to move again. As evening will fall once more, you carry this understanding with you. The nights are not meant to be pleasant. They are meant to be survived. And survival, you realize, has its own quiet dignity. The night you fear most is the one you cannot prepare for. As dusk settles, the air carries a weight that feels different, that thicker somehow. The sky darkens faster than usual, clouds stacking low and heavy. You sense it before anyone speaks. Something is coming and it will not be gentle. By the time darkness fully arrives, the wind begins to rise. It starts as a whisper along the shelter walls, then grows louder, pushing and probing. Snow follows soon after, first as scattered flakes, then as a steady curtain that erases distance and depth. Familiar landmarks vanish. The world shrinks to the space you can touch. Storms like this appear often in winter records, described as sudden and overwhelming, leaving little time to react. You feel that urgency now. People move quickly, checking roofs, bracing doors, packing snow against walls to block drafts. Every hand is needed. Fear sharpens focus. Inside the shelter trembles. Wind rattles boards, forcing cold air through even the smallest gaps. Snow hisses as it hits hot surfaces near the fire, melting and steaming instantly. The sound is constant, relentless. You feel the temperature drop despite the flames burning steadily. There is an old belief that storms carry moods that some are angry while others simply pass through. This one feels impatient, rushing and loud. You catch yourself assigning it intention as if that helps make sense of its force. Sleep becomes impossible. The noise alone keeps everyone awake. Someone stays by the door listening for changes. Another feeds the fire more often than usual, knowing heat will be stripped away faster tonight. You sit with your back against the wall, feeling vibrations travel through the wood into your spine. Time stretches strangely during storms. Minutes blur. You measure progress by sounds. The wind peaks, then eases, then returns stronger. Snow piles against the shelter, pressing inward. At one point, someone goes outside briefly to clear the entrance, returning with snow clinging thickly to clothing and hair. There are stories passed along about storms flattening entire settlements, but no one knows how often that truly happened. Memory exaggerates. Fear edits details. All you know is this storm demands attention, patience, and endurance. At some point in the night, exhaustion sets in. The wind still howls, but your body can no longer stay tense. You rest where you can, eyes closed, listening. Trust forms quietly. The shelter is held so far, the fire still burns. People are still breathing. Gradually, the storm begins to lose its edge. The wind drops from a roar to a steady rush. Snowfall lightens. The pressure against the walls eases. Relief arrives, not as celebration but as silence. When dawn finally breaks, pale light reveals the aftermath. Snowbanks rise high against the shelter. Paths are buried. The world looks new and unfamiliar, softened and reshaped overnight. You step outside cautiously, cold biting but air calmer. The storm has passed. Survival feels heavier now, earned through hours of vigilance. You carry that experience with you as evening that approaches, again knowing that winter does not announce its hardest tests. It simply delivers them in the dark, asking only that you endure. When the storm passes and the world settles into stillness again, a deeper quiet follows. This is the quiet of distance, of being cut off. As night falls, you feel how far you are from anything resembling help. The nearest settlement might be days away in good weather. In winter, that distance stretches endlessly. Remote outposts and scattered homesteads were common across colonial America, especially as settlers pushed inland. You feel the reality of that isolation most strongly at night. During the day, work fills the hours and movement feels possible. After dark, the cold and the silence close in, making the world feel very small. The forest presses close around the shelter, its edges blurred by snow and shadow. There are no lanterns beyond your own. No distant voices. The absence of human sound becomes noticeable heavy. You realize that if something goes wrong tonight, there will be no one coming. That knowledge sits quietly in your chest. Inside, the shelter feels both protective and confining. Walls keep the cold out, but they also mark the limits of your world. You listen for sounds that confirm life nearby. Breathing, shifting bodies, the fire settling into embers. These sounds matter more now. Some settlers believed isolation itself could weaken the spirit, making people more vulnerable to fear and illness. Others saw it as a test of character, something to be endured with resolve. You feel both ideas tug at you as the night stretches on. Solitude sharpens thoughts for better or worse. Sleep is lighter here. Every unfamiliar noise pulls you awake. A branch snapping under snow, the distant cry of an animal. Without the buffer of neighbours, these sounds feel closer, more personal. You learn to tell which ones matter and which can be ignored, but the learning takes time. The fire burns steadily, a small circle of certainty in an uncertain world. You sit close, feeling its warmth on your face, letting it anchor you. It is easy to imagine how a single mistake could change everything. That awareness keeps you careful. No one speaks much tonight. Words feel unnecessary. Presence is enough. You share space, warmth, and nuance. In isolation, companionship takes on new weight. When dawn finally arrives, it feels like a gift. Light stretches the world outward again, revealing familiar shapes beyond the shelter. The forest recedes slightly. Distance becomes manageable once more. As evening will come again soon enough, you carry the memory of this night with you. Isolation does not disappear, but you learn to live within it. Winter nights in remote places teach patience, attentiveness, and a deep reliance on the small, steady comforts that remain when everything else falls away. By now, the nights follow a pattern shaped by necessity rather than law, yet everyone seems to know the rules. Once darkness settles, movement slows, voice is lower. Certain actions wait until morning unless they cannot. These are not written commands, but shared understandings formed through experience and reinforced by cold consequences. As evening deepens, doors are checked and secured, not against intruders so much as against wind and drifting snow. Once shut, they are opened sparingly. Each opening lets warmth escape, and warmth is too precious to waste. You notice how people pause before lifting a latch, weighing need against loss. Inside, the fire becomes the centre of order. Only a few tend it chosen not by rank but by reliability. Too many hands invite mistakes. Others respect this without question, settling into places where their presence does not interfere. The night runs smoother when everyone knows where not to stand. Certain behaviours are quietly discouraged. Loud arguments, careless movement near flames, reckless use of tools. These things threaten more than peace, they threaten survival. You see how a sharp glance or gentle hand on an arm redirects energy without confrontation. Children learn these rules quickly. A raised finger, a whispered reminder. They understand that night demands different behaviour than day. Stillness becomes skill, not a punishment. There are also expectations of watchfulness. Someone is always listening even while resting. Fire is checked. Breathing is noticed. Silence is monitored. These habits grow automatic, passed from night to night without discussion. Some accounts hint that these unwritten rules varied between communities shaped by size, belief, and environment. Others suggest remarkable similarities across distant settlements. Sitting here watching the same careful patterns repeat, you sense how winter narrows choices until only the most practical remain. When someone breaks the rhythm, the effect is immediate. A loud noise startles everyone. A careless step scatters embers. Correction comes swiftly, not harshly, but firmly. There is no room for repeated mistakes. As the night wears on, the shelter settles into a steady hush. People rest within the boundaries set by experience. You feel safer inside this quiet order, doing as everyone around you shares the same understanding. When morning comes, these rules loosen. Doors open are wider. Voices rise. Movement returns. But as evening approaches again, the pattern will return too, settling gently over the shelter like another layer of protection. You prepare for night with that knowledge close at hand. Winter nights are governed not by force but by shared restraint. And within that restraint you find a strange kind of freedom, the freedom that comes from knowing exactly what is expected when darkness falls. As darkness settles, the mind begins to wander in unfamiliar directions. Cold sharpens imagination. Shadows stretch longer than they should. The fire throws shapes against the walls that seem to move when you're not looking directly at them. You tell yourself it is just light and fatigue, but the feeling lingers. Stories surface more often at night, not told loudly, not always intentionally. Someone mentions a strange sound heard once. Another recalls a warning passed down from earlier winters. These fragments drift through the shelter, settling into the quiet. You listen without interrupting, aware that fear travels easily when the world outside is unseen. Sleep brings vivid dreams. Some are comforting, filled with warmth and light. Others are unsettling, blending memory with imagination. You wake unsure where you are, heart racing, until the familiar shapes of the shelter come back into focus. Cold blurs the boundary between dreaming and waking. People hold on to small superstitions. Certain nights are thought to be worse than others. A sudden chill is seen as a sign. A candle that flickers oddly draws attention. You notice how these beliefs influence behaviour even among those who dismiss them during the day. There is comfort in shared fear. Whispered reassurances pass between sleepers. A hand rests briefly on an arm. Presence matters. You feel less alone knowing others are awake thinking similar thoughts in the dark. Some settlers believed winter nights made the spirit more vulnerable, as if cold opened gaps where worry and doubt could slip in. Others saw these moments as test chances to confront fear directly. Sitting awake listening to the wind brush the shelter, you sense how both ideas coexist. The night grows quieter as hours pass. Fear loses some of its edge, dulled by exhaustion. The fire settles into embers. Breathing slows. You let yourself relax slightly, trusting that dawn will come as it always has. When morning arrives, the fears of the night feel distant, almost foolish in daylight. But you know they will return with darkness. Winter nights carry their own emotional weather as real and unpredictable as snow. As evening approaches, again you prepare not just your body but your mind. You remind yourself that fear is part of the night, not a sign of weakness. And as you settle in, listening to the quiet settle around you, you allow yourself to drift, knowing that even the darkest hours pass eventually. By now the shelter no longer